Reba's gaze fell on the I Give Up 2000. It was a ridiculous machine, a vintage vibrating belt that promised weight loss through sheer laziness. In a moment of madness, she plugged it in. Bitzt, 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 bitzt. The vibration traveled up her legs, a mechanical heartbeat in the void. She let it shake her, hoping the physical sensation would drown out the hollow ache in her chest. It was a lie, of course. You couldn't get results without effort. You couldn't keep a family together just by wishing it so. And you certainly couldn't stop your children from growing up and leaving you behind in a garage full of ghosts. What are you doing, Mom? Reba jumped, her hand flying to the power switch. Kira was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression a perfect mirror of Reba's own skeptical mask. I'm testing the equipment, Reba said, smoothing her hair with practiced dignity. It's an asset. Could be worth something on eBay. You're lonely, Kira said. She didn't say it with pity. She said it with the blunt, surgical precision that made her the most difficult and most honest of Reba's children. I'm not lonely. I'm peaceful. There is a difference, Kira. One involves a lack of people, the other involves a lack of headaches. I'm currently enjoying a headache-free environment. Kira walked into the room and sat on a stack of empty boxes. He's already talking about where he's going to put the man cave. As if a guy who plays with balloon animals needs a man cave to hide from his own shadow. Reba felt a sharp, hot pang in her chest. He deserves it. He worked hard. He's moving up in the world, Kira. That's what people do. He's miserable, Kira countered. He wears those suits and talks about market volatility like he's reading from a script. He misses you. He misses the garage. He just doesn't know how to say it without feeling like a failure. Reba looked at the torn-up floor of the garage. He'll get over it. If she convinced herself that Van was happy, she didn't have to admit how much she was bleeding. I'm not going to get over it, Kira said softly. I'm glad I'm back from school, Mom. Even if it's just us and Dad's midlife crisis across the street, I didn't want to leave you alone in this big, empty house. Reba looked at her daughter, the one who had fought her every step of the way, the one who had fled to her father's house, only to realize that the grass wasn't greener, just more expensive. In that moment, the armor cracked. Thank you, Kira, Reba whispered. Don't get mushy, Kira warned, standing up and dusting off her jeans. I'm only staying because the Wi-Fi is better here than at Barbara Jean's. Her router is from the Stone Age, but as Kira left, she squeezed Reba's hand. It was a brief, almost accidental contact, but in the vacuum of the Hart household, it felt like a lifeline. Chapter 3. The Tearing of the Soul. The death of Heart and Soul didn't happen in a high-rise boardroom. It happened over a bowl of lukewarm pasta on a Tuesday evening in the kitchen. Reba had scrubbed for 2 decades. Van and Cheyenne had come over to sign the dissolution papers. Steve Norris had been clear, a clean break. He didn't want the Norris brand associated with a homegrown operation run out of a suburban garage. He wanted Van Montgomery to be a corporate shark, unburdened by the sentimentality of his mother-in-law. The documents sat on the floral tablecloth, white and sterile. I just need you to sign here, Mrs. H., Van said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the salt shaker. He looked like he was wearing a costume. The suit was too sharp, the hair too perfect. Reba picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking. She thought of the way they had high-fived in the driveway. 2 underdogs who had finally caught the bus. Wait, Cheyenne said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. Don't do it. Che, we talked about this, Van said, his frustration bubbling to the surface. Steve says this is the only way to get the senior associate position. I don't care what Steve says. Cheyenne stood up, her face flushed with a sudden, fierce clarity. Look at us. We're acting like we're in a movie about corporate takeovers. Van, you hate those suits. You hate that office where nobody laughs. You miss the balloon animals. And you miss the way Mom makes you coffee, even though she complains about it every single time. I have to provide, Van shouted, standing up to meet her. The Norris man facade was cracking. "There's a baby coming. I can't provide with luck and good intentions. I can't be the guy who lives in the garage forever." "You provide by being you," Cheyenne cried. "We're moving to a house that feels like a hotel. We're leaving the only person who actually cares if we succeed or fail. Mom, tell him he's making a mistake." Reba looked from her daughter to her son-in-law. She saw the desperation in both of them. She saw the way the world, Steve Norris's world, was trying to tear them apart in the name of success. She looked at the papers, the legal jargon that tried to erase 3 years of sweat, laughter, and shared victories. Slowly, deliberately, Reba picked up the documents. "Mrs. H?" Van whispered. Reba gripped the thick stack of paper and tore them in half. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. She tore them again and again, until the table was covered in white confetti. "Mrs. H," Van gasped, his eyes wide with shock. "Steve Norris can take his mahogany desk and his bidet and shove them where the sun don't shine," Reba said, her eyes flashing with the old, dangerous fire. "You're not a Norris man, Van. You're a Hart, and Harts don't sign away their souls for a senior associate title. But the money, the house. Steve will ruin us," Van stammered. "Let him try," Reba said, her voice steady now, vibrating with a strength she hadn't felt in months. "We'll find another way. We'll be heart and soul again. Maybe we won't have a skyscraper, but we'll have a business where people actually like each other. If you ever wear that tie in my house again, I'm using it to tie you to the I give up 2000. Van looked at the torn papers. He looked at Cheyenne, whose eyes were bright with tears of relief, and then the tension simply left him. He slumped back into his chair and started to laugh, a deep, genuine, booming laugh that shook the kitchen walls. "I really did miss the stapler," he admitted, wiping his eyes. The celebration was interrupted by a shadow in the doorway. It was Brock. He was soaked from a sudden Houston downpour, his hair a sagging, damp mess, his leather vest dripping on the floor. He looked like a man who had gone looking for himself and found only a dead end. "I sold the Harley," he said, his voice hollow. "Brock, what happened?" Reba asked, pulling out a chair. "I realized I was just a guy on a bike, and no matter how fast I rode, I was still 50, and I was still lonely." He looked at the family gathered around the table, the laughter, the mess, the cold pasta. Can I have some food? And maybe a towel?" Reba sighed, but there was a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Sit down, you idiot. The pasta's cold, the business is technically failing, and we're all probably going to be broke by Christmas." "Sounds like home," Brock said, taking his place at the table. Chapter 4. The War of the Roses and Realtors. Rejecting Steve Norris was one thing. Surviving him was another. Steve wasn't just a realtor. He was a shark who owned the ocean. Within a week of the tearing of the contracts, the heart and soul signs in the Heights were being accidentally knocked over by Norris construction crews. Prospective clients were receiving anonymous calls telling them that Reba Hart was unstable and that Van Montgomery was a failed athlete with no fiscal sense. "He's trying to starve us out," Reba said, slamming a folder onto the garage desk. "He's blacklisting our listings." The financial reality was biting hard. With Cheyenne's pregnancy progressing, the nanny budget had evaporated into a maybe we can afford generic diapers budget. Van was working 18-hour days, scouring the city for any listing that Norris hadn't already touched. But while the real estate war raged, Brock had found a strange new sanctuary. He had abandoned the leather and the perms for a saw, a hammer, and a bucket of cedar wood. "It's about providing a home for those who can't speak for themselves," Reba, Brock, explained one afternoon in the driveway, holding up a birdhouse that looked suspiciously like a miniature Victorian mansion. "Brock, it has a wraparound porch and a tiny copper chimney," Reba observed, leaning against the garage door. "Do the sparrows in Houston really need a mudroom?" "They need dignity, Reba. Just like the rest of us. These aren't just birdhouses. These are avian heritage sanctuaries." Barbara Jean watched from the doorway, her eyes gleaming with predatory marketing genius. While Brock saw wood and nails, she saw a lifestyle brand. She saw a way to monetize Brock's midlife crisis and turn it into a socialite's must-have accessory. "He's good at it, isn't he?" Barbara Jean whispered to Reba. "He's an idiot who spent $400 on tiny shingles," Reba replied, but she couldn't look away. He was looking at the grain of the wood. He was building something that wasn't for himself. "Maybe being an idiot is a prerequisite for being a heart," Barbara Jean mused. Reba looked at the birdhouse, then at the empty spaces where her family used to be. Chapter 5. The Gable House Gamble. The opportunity heart and soul needed to survive the Norris blockade came in the form of Mrs. Gable, a woman whose house was so old and eccentric, it was practically a historical monument and a realtor's absolute nightmare. Mrs. Gable was 92, with skin like crinkled parchment and a gaze that could wither a cactus. She sat in her velvet armchair, surrounded by the dust of 6 decades, and watched Reba and Van as if they were trespassers.